Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When John Carter inherited a peaceful riverfront estate, he expected tranquility, not war. But when a power-hungry HOA set its sights on claiming his land through lies, trespass, and forged documents, John didn't back down. He fought back with law, fire, and a vengeance they never saw coming. John Carter hadn't planned on starting over at 45, but after the sudden loss of his wife and the long, soul-crushing stretch of city life, he needed something different: peace, solitude, purpose. The answer came unexpectedly when his uncle passed and left him the family estate, a 15-acre stretch of riverfront land nestled just outside a small town in Virginia. The house, built in the 1800s, was a stately yet weathered two-story colonial with a wraparound porch and a rustling canopy of oak trees overhead. The James River curved around the back of the property like a silver ribbon, serene and quiet. It was the kind of place where time moved slower, where the noise of the world faded beneath the sound of wind in the leaves. John packed his things, gave up his apartment in the city, and made the move with little hesitation. His job as a remote structural engineer allowed him to work from anywhere, and the idea of renovating the old estate gave him something to focus on besides grief. He spent his first weeks clearing brush, repairing shutters, and walking the perimeter of the land, reacquainting himself with the place he had visited only during rare childhood summers. It didn't take long to notice the changes in the surrounding area. On the southern edge of his property, where there had once been only forest and wild meadow, now stood rows of freshly built homes. Beige and gray McMansions lined up like cloned soldiers. A master-planned community called Willow Creek. He had heard of them. Developments governed by homeowner associations that dictated everything from fence height to mailbox colors. John didn't think much of it. His land predated Willow Creek by nearly a century, and the property deed was ironclad. Whatever rules they had didn't apply to him, or so he thought. It started subtly, almost innocently, little signs that something wasn't quite right. One morning, as John stepped out onto his porch with a mug of black coffee, he noticed a man in a neon vest trimming the weeds along the edge of his gravel driveway. The man was wearing the logo of the Willow Creek HOA on his chest. John called out, asking what he was doing. The worker straightened up and replied that he was maintaining community landscaping. John frowned, telling him this wasn't community property, but private land. The man looked confused, muttered something about routine perimeter care, and drove off on a golf cart that buzzed back through a gap in the tree line leading to the neighboring development. A few days later, John returned from a supply run in town to find a laminated flyer pinned to his front gate. It was brightly colored, with the Willow Creek HOA logo in bold at the top and a list of friendly reminders for homeowners beneath it. The items included rules about trash can visibility, paint palettes for homes, and even a regulation about American flag placement. At first, he chuckled. Clearly, it was a mistake. But the flyer wasn't the last. Over the next week, he received two more, this time slipped into his mailbox. The tension sharpened when he discovered a newly planted wooden stake near the riverbank on the back edge of his property. It had a plastic sign zip-tied to it. Willow Creek Private River Access, members only. John stared at it, stunned. No one had asked permission to put it there. No one had even mentioned it. He yanked the sign out of the ground, stormed inside, and called the number listed on the last flyer. A cheerful female voice answered, introducing herself as the assistant to Lynn Barnes, president of the Willow Creek HOA. When John explained the situation and made it very clear that he was not a member, the tone shifted, cooler, more formal. "Mr. Carter," she said, "our records show that your property falls within the expanded zone of Willow Creek. You'll be receiving an updated welcome packet soon." John ended the call without responding. There was no expanded zone. His deed was clear, recorded, and registered in the county. He pulled it from his file cabinet that same night, studying every line, confirming every boundary. Nothing had changed. But the next morning, he spotted two unfamiliar people standing near the trail that led to the river, an older couple with HOA badges, clipboards in hand. When John approached, they smiled politely and said they were surveying public access routes for the neighborhood. John told them in no uncertain terms to leave. As they walked off, the woman turned and said over her shoulder, "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Mr. Carter. We're all neighbors here. The HOA is just trying to maintain order." John didn't respond, but as he stood there watching them disappear through the woods toward Willow Creek, something in his gut told him that this wasn't just an error or a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of something much worse. Within a week, the quiet tension turned into something louder, more calculated. It began with whispers. Neighbors from the Willow Creek subdivision walking their dogs a little too close to John's fence line, casting long glances at his house and murmuring to one another. At first, John dismissed it as curiosity, maybe even gossip fueled by the HOA's overreach. But then came the pamphlets. Colorful, glossy, and professionally printed, they appeared in local mailboxes. John got one himself, though his was jammed halfway into his gate with clear intent. The front read in bold, "Protect our river access. Stop the blockade." Inside, the content was inflammatory. It accused an individual residing at the edge of the Willow Creek community of illegally restricting access to the community's only natural recreational resource. It urged residents to speak out against encroachment and included a QR code linking to a petition titled "Reclaim the Riverfront." John read the entire thing twice, anger growing in his chest. The pamphlet referred to him anonymously, but there was no mistaking who it meant. The HOA had twisted the narrative, painting him as the outsider infringing on them, not the other way around. Soon, more signs of agitation emerged. Children and teenagers began appearing along his tree line, peering through the foliage, snapping photos of his house with their phones before darting off. Adults started walking trails that didn't exist before, now hastily cleared footpaths that ended near his backyard. One afternoon, John caught a man in business attire taking drone footage above his property. When confronted, the man casually said, "Just updating our community visuals," and left without apology. Enough was enough. John installed security cameras, discreet but visible. He reinforced his fences and posted bright orange private property, no trespassing signs along the riverbank. The next day, someone spray-painted "Greedy Old Man" on one of the signs. He documented it, logged the footage, and reported it to the local sheriff's office, who promised to keep an eye on things. But the deputy's uncertain tone didn't inspire much confidence. Then came the HOA's next move, an official notice posted to their online portal. A screenshot of it, sent to John by a sympathetic resident, included language about non-compliant landowners who were refusing to align with shared community values. It named his parcel directly. They were escalating from passive-aggressive signs to organized social pressure. The final blow that week came during a Saturday HOA meeting held at the Willow Creek Clubhouse. John didn't attend, of course, but a friend who lived in the neighborhood recorded the segment where Lynn Barnes, the HOA president, spoke directly about pending action to integrate community assets. The room clapped. John knew exactly what she meant. They weren't just provoking him, they were preparing to take his land by force, or by fiction, and they had no idea how hard he was willing to fight. The next phase wasn't subtle. It arrived one overcast morning with the growl of engines and the sound of boots on gravel. John was in his workshop when he heard the commotion and stepped outside to find a crew of workers unloading benches, trash bins, and landscaping tools near the trail that led to the river. A flatbed truck had backed into a clearing, and men in reflective vests were already digging into the soft earth with shovels, preparing to install a paved walking path. Bright flags marked the edges of what was clearly a planned recreational area. John stormed down the slope toward them, disbelief giving way to fury. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" One of the workers looked up, startled. "Just doing what we're hired to do, sir. Trail extension for Willow Creek." "This isn't Willow Creek," John snapped. "This is private property. Mine." Before the worker could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Mr. Carter," came the unmistakable tone of Lynn Barnes, the HOA president, emerging from the woods in a tailored jacket and pristine boots. She held a folder in one hand, her other resting smugly on her hip. "There's no need to be so dramatic. We're simply enhancing community access to the riverfront. It's all within our rights." "You're trespassing," John said coldly, "and you've hired people to build on land you don't own. This ends now." Lynn opened her folder and presented a glossy printout. According to our most recent expansion map, this section of land has been annexed into the Willow Creek jurisdiction. The previous plat was updated last quarter. The county approved it. John took the paper from her, his eyes narrowing. The document looked official at a glance, but something was wrong. His property's parcel number had been altered by 1 digit, and the boundaries were subtly redrawn to make his southern acreage part of the HOA's green space. At the bottom was a forged signature from a county zoning official. John had worked enough with city plans in his engineering career to spot the signs. It was a high-quality fake. "You expect me to believe this crap?" he said, holding the paper up. "This is fraud." Lynn's expression didn't change. "If you have concerns, you're welcome to contact our legal counsel, but unless you're prepared to file an injunction, I suggest you let the work continue. This area belongs to all of us now." John took out his phone, dialed 911 without breaking eye contact. "Yes, I'd like to report criminal trespass in progress on private land. I also need an officer to inspect forged property documents. Yes, right now." Lynn's expression finally cracked. A flicker of unease passed over her face, but she recovered quickly. "You're overreacting," she said. "No one wants a fight here." "You should have thought of that before sending a crew onto my land," John said, turning to the workers. "Pack it up, now, or you'll be dealing with the sheriff." The crew looked uncertain, glancing between Lynn and John. Finally, one of them made the call, and within minutes they began slowly gathering their tools. Lynn made one last attempt to assert herself. "You're going to regret making this difficult, Mr. Carter." John stepped closer. "No, Lynn, you're going to regret ever stepping onto my land." As the trucks pulled away and the riverbank returned to silence, John walked back to the house, the forged document still in hand. This wasn't just a territorial dispute anymore. It was a deliberate, coordinated attempt to steal land under the guise of paperwork and bureaucracy. And John had no intention of letting it go unpunished. By the following morning, John had transformed his living room into a war room. The forged document from Lynn Barnes lay spread across his dining table alongside his original deed, maps, county plat surveys, and a thick binder of records from his uncle's ownership. With each hour, his anger cooled into something sharper: focus. He wasn't just going to defend his land, he was going to dismantle whatever corrupt machinery was backing the HOA's power grab. He started with a call to the county recorder's office. After a tense 30-minute wait and some persistent nudging, a clerk confirmed that no official boundary changes had been filed involving his property. The plat Lynn had presented did not match anything in the public record. When John asked about the signature on the fake document, the clerk hesitated. "That doesn't look like Mark Tiller's signature," she said cautiously, referring to the zoning officer supposedly listed. "And we don't process annexation approvals through HOAs. That would have to go through the Board of Supervisors." That was all John needed to hear. He hired a local attorney named Melissa Royce, a sharp land use specialist who had spent years fighting county-level land disputes. When he showed her the documents and recounted everything that had happened, she leaned back in her chair, eyebrows raised. "This isn't just trespassing," she said. "This is attempted land theft, possibly conspiracy to commit fraud, and maybe even forgery of public records if they submitted this to a government office. If we dig deep enough, I wouldn't be surprised if this isn't the first time." They began compiling evidence: drone footage, screenshots of the HOA's online claims, copies of the river access pamphlets, statements from the workers who'd unknowingly trespassed, and logs from John's security cameras. Melissa also sent formal cease and desist letters to Lynn Barnes and the HOA's legal team. Within days, the HOA doubled down with arrogance, filing a counterclaim in county civil court alleging that John had interfered with public easement development. The gloves were off. John didn't stop there. At Melissa's suggestion, he filed a complaint with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, forwarding copies of the suspected forged documents and referencing the illegal annexation claim. That move triggered something bigger than John expected. Within a week, he was contacted by a state investigator looking into zoning fraud allegations. Apparently, John's complaint had overlapped with another pending case. Another homeowner, miles away, had also accused a local HOA of redrawing property lines without consent. And then the bomb dropped. The investigator called to inform John that multiple complaints had surfaced about Willow Creek's HOA leadership, particularly Lynn Barnes. There were whispers of quiet coercion. older homeowners being told they had to pay community improvement fees on land they didn't know had been reclassified. John's case, with its forged plat and clear surveillance footage, was now part of an active criminal probe. What began as a defense of his backyard had grown into something wider. John was no longer just fighting for his land. He had uncovered the blueprint of a predatory system, one that manipulated documents, intimidated homeowners, and operated under the shield of HOA bureaucracy. And he wasn't done yet. News travels fast in small towns, but scandals travel faster, especially when they involve forged documents and land grabs. Just 2 days after the state investigator reached out to John, the local news station aired a segment titled HOA Gone Rogue. It featured drone footage of the unauthorized construction on John's property, blurred faces of the workers, and a voiceover that recounted his story in detail. The footage of the Willow Creek private river access sign twisting in the wind said more than words ever could. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Viewers flooded the station with messages. Some were furious on John's behalf. Others came forward with stories of their own. Seniors threatened with fines for garden statues. Families intimidated into repainting their homes. Residents billed for shared landscaping improvements that never happened. It turned out Willow Creek's HOA had a long trail of questionable actions, but until John's case, no one had dared challenge them so directly. John, for his part, stayed composed. He gave a single calm interview from his porch, laying out the facts. His land was never part of Willow Creek. The documents were forged, and the HOA had trespassed and lied. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. The next domino fell when the state attorney general's office announced the launch of a formal investigation into the Willow Creek HOA. Lynn Barnes was named specifically. Within days, subpoenas were issued. County officials were interviewed. A search warrant was executed at the HOA's administrative office. Computers and filing cabinets were hauled out in front of stunned residents. The sight of Lynn being escorted out in the background, stone-faced, refusing to comment, made the front page of the Sunday paper. But the criminal probe was just one front in the battle. John's attorney, Melissa, had filed a civil suit against the HOA for damages, defamation, and attempted property theft. The counterclaim they had filed was dismissed almost immediately when the forged plat was proven fraudulent by county records. The civil court granted an emergency injunction legally barring the HOA from entering John's property under threat of arrest. Behind the scenes, things were unraveling for the HOA's leadership. The association's treasurer resigned within days. 2 board members turned over internal emails to investigators in exchange for leniency. The emails revealed that Lynn Barnes had knowingly instructed her board to streamline expansion by adjusting plat lines where practical, a chilling euphemism for altering land maps to include properties without consent. Then came the criminal charges. Lynn was arrested and formally charged with multiple felonies: criminal trespass, forgery of public records, attempted fraud, and abuse of position. News vans parked outside the courthouse the day of her arraignment. Former supporters turned silent. Former allies turned away. For John, it was vindication, but it was more than that. He had exposed not just an overreaching HOA president, but a broken system, a structure built on intimidation, manipulation, and the quiet hope that no one would ever fight back. Now, someone had. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Locals filled every bench, many standing along the walls or watching from the hallway. What had begun as a quiet dispute between a single homeowner and an overreaching HOA had exploded into a full-scale legal reckoning. At the center of it all sat Lynn Barnes, no longer the composed figure who once strutted across John Carter's land with a fake plat map in hand. Now, in a dark blazer and with tired eyes, she sat behind her defense attorneys, staring straight ahead, jaw clenched. The prosecution opened with a searing summary, a coordinated attempt to unlawfully annex private land, documented efforts to deceive local authorities, and deliberate manipulation of HOA influence to silence opposition. They had witnesses, evidence, email records, sworn statements, and perhaps most damning, John's high-resolution surveillance footage capturing the trespass and construction in real time. The forged plat map, which had triggered the entire case, was introduced on the first day. The county's zoning officer testified under oath that the signature was not his. and that no such plat update had ever been filed. John was called to the stand on day 2. Dressed simply, with a calm but unwavering presence, he recounted each step, from the first mowing incident to Lynn's fake documents, to the early morning call to 911. When asked what motivated him to pursue the matter instead of settling, he answered plainly, "Because if I didn't stop them, they would have done this to someone else, someone who couldn't fight back." The defense attempted to paint John as an angry recluse who refused to cooperate with community efforts, but their arguments quickly crumbled under the weight of evidence. The jury heard testimony from other residents who had faced similar pressure. One elderly woman cried as she described how she paid over $2,000 in bogus community upkeep fees after receiving threatening letters. A young couple testified they were told they couldn't sell their home unless they paid retroactive assessments for improvements that had never been done. None of these people had questioned the HOA before, but now, with John's case as the catalyst, they spoke out. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the HOA was disintegrating. With its leadership gutted and finances frozen due to the civil lawsuit, Willow Creek's HOA operations came to a standstill. Residents began demanding transparency, audits, and resignations. The local news covered every turn of the trial, fueling a slow but decisive wave of reform. When the verdict came, the courtroom was silent. Lynn Barnes was found guilty on all counts: criminal trespass, attempted property fraud, falsification of public documents, and abuse of power. The judge, stern and visibly disgusted, handed down a sentence that included 5 years of prison time with no possibility of early parole, citing the calculated nature and community-wide impact of her actions. Simultaneously, the civil court issued a sweeping ruling in John's favor. The HOA was ordered to pay damages for trespass, property disruption, and defamation. The total exceeded $500,000. The judge also imposed a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from ever attempting to assert jurisdiction over his land again. In the aftermath, the HOA collapsed. The association was formally dissolved by resident vote. A transitional board was created to handle the dissolution process, but it operated under tight supervision and public scrutiny. Willow Creek residents, once apathetic or afraid, now rallied around change. And John, he returned to his riverfront home, knowing that his battle had not only defended his own land, but freed a community from the shadow of unchecked authority. He had stood alone at first, but by the end, he had led a quiet revolution. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a sense of stillness that John hadn't felt since the moment he first saw that cursed members-only sign staked into his riverbank. The air smelled of thawing earth and fresh pine. The river shimmered just beyond the trees, and for the first time in months, there were no tire tracks cutting through his property, no strangers lurking near the tree line with clipboards or cameras. The land was quiet, and it was his. But John wasn't content with silence alone. Some things, he believed, deserved a final word. He began by restoring the area near the river to its natural state, ripping up the half-installed stone path, removing every bolt and board the trespassing crew had left behind. Then he installed something new, a sturdy handcrafted cedar sign burned into the wood with bold letters that read, "Private property, not a park. Trespassers will be prosecuted, especially HOA presidents." It became something of a neighborhood legend. People came by just to take pictures with it, laughing in disbelief that things had gone so far. John didn't mind. He found it therapeutic. A few weeks after the trial, he hosted what he called the Freedom Cookout, an open invitation to any Willow Creek resident who wanted to stop by. No HOA approval needed, no dress code, no clipboard inspections. Just hot dogs, cold drinks, folding chairs in the grass, and one of the best views in the county. Dozens came. Even some who had once opposed him stood awkwardly near the grill before extending hesitant hands and offering quiet apologies. One elderly couple lingered after sunset, sitting with John beneath the porch lanterns. "We never had the nerve to stand up," the husband admitted, "but you gave us permission to." John nodded slowly, grateful, but still grounded. Sometimes all it takes is someone who's too damn stubborn to be pushed. In the weeks that followed, more stories emerged. Lynn Barnes, now serving her sentence at the state correctional facility, had been assigned to community restitution duties. Ironically, one of her assignments was landscaping work at the very courthouse where she had once filed her fraudulent claim. The image of her pushing a wheelbarrow past the judge's chambers made its way to social media, and the internet did not disappoint. John didn't gloat, not publicly, but he did print that photo, frame it, and hang it in his study with a single-word caption, "Consequences." The land healed faster than expected. With the HOA disbanded, neighbors began forming real bonds, unfiltered by committees or rules. A few even approached John about starting a more informal community group, one based on respect rather than control. He wasn't interested in leading it, but he agreed to attend the first bonfire. Progress, he thought, didn't have to wear a badge or hold a gavel. On the one-year anniversary of the verdict, John stood on his riverbank, coffee in hand, watching the water move like it always had, steadily, freely. He felt no need for fences or threats, just truth, defended and upheld. He smiled to himself as the wind stirred the trees, and in the soft hush of the morning, John Carter finally allowed himself to let it all go. The land was still his, but now, so was the peace.